super happy to be here together with María José Garde, and I'm gonna, show off my Spanish skills just for a minute. Quería agradecerle por su presencia aquí en París con nosotros. We're super committed to having that strong dialogue between research and policy. And María José, you are the Director General of Taxation at the Ministry of Finance in Spain since 2018. You served as chair of the OECD Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information from 2017 to 2022. And since 2023, you're also the chair of the Code of Conduct Group on Business Taxation at the EU level. So, of course, you have a lot of experience working in policy circles, both at domestic, EU, and international level. And Gabriel referred earlier to that ivory tower, and you were you were in the war room to actually break down that ivory tower. And we also want to have that conversation with you to actually, match the research conversation with the person that is actually, negotiating to translate these issues into actual policy. So let me just start with two questions for you. One, of course, we would like to have to know a bit more about the experience of the Spanish government in attempting to tax high net worth individual, what exists in Spain, what works, what doesn't work, what needs improvement. And we are very happy to see the Spanish government and the Spanish Minister of Finance, Carlos Cuerpo, signal his support for this agenda to be brought forward, and we wanted to know a bit more of the rationale behind that. If you could also say a few words about that. I'll leave you my mic. No, you have one.
First, congratulations to Gabriel for this proposal, and of course, thanks for the invitation. I think it's very refreshing for someone from Ministry of Finance, working in the domestic, as you said, international, of course, but it's very refreshing to come to the university and to talk to researchers and students and people that do more than just drafting laws and try to resolve all the political and policies questions that the daily basis is very difficult. It's very interesting to hear from you from this side of the world. Proposing very interesting things, but then we have to land to aterrizar, as we say in Spanish, to land the proposal on the real world, and it's quite difficult. But of course, I think it's a very challenging proposal, and but it's true that Spain is one of these European countries. It's funny that you didn't include it because our wealth tax is a very old one, and I don't know how efficient and how good and powerful is to reduce the inequality that I think is the main purpose of a wealth tax. As I said, Spain has enforced a wealth tax since 1977. We included with the 78 reform, and at the time that we included the personal income tax. It was suspended for a couple of years, but in 2011 it was restored again to the crisis, and now it's a permanent wealth tax. I think that you mentioned there are good reasons, like we said, a social justice and inequality, reason of also efficiency and effectiveness of the tax system, and all legitimacy of the tax system as a whole. So I think to prevent taxpayers with greater capacity to pay from avoiding paying the tax that I would think they should pay. To respond, wealth, as you say, is a real expression of capacity to pay, and I think we all agree that, at least in the case of Spain, should be taxed in any modern tax system. But also, we have faced arguments against having a wealth tax. The double taxation, always now you pay taxes when you get your income, and then you have to pay taxes when you have your savings, and then you buy your house, you sell your house. So, this is an argument that always is on the table, that it's a double taxation there. And also that could make distortion in the decision-making process of economic agents between present and future consumption, the lack of liquidity of the incentive of capital outflows. To respond to those negative effects, I think the wealth taxation system should be appropriately designed. I mean, I know your proposal is not talking about wealth tax, but I think when you try to design a good wealth tax system, I mean, there are probably a couple of main elements that we should take into account. First, the identification and core evaluation, of course, of the assets and rights. Also, we require good information. It's not only the information that the taxpayer provides you on a tax return, but also you need information normally if they have assets, the whole assets in other countries. So good information is key in this sense. And also, I think the integrity, you also have that thing that in your proposal, the integrity, the taxation of income and the taxation of wealth. It's not, I mean, you cannot take into account the taxation of the income, because at the end of the day, it's part of the whole system, the personal taxation system. So I think it's probably all elements, but when you try to draft a good wealth taxation system, there will be the elements that I will highlight. So in particular in Spain, I mean, also I think most of the studies has pointed out that there has been an increase of inequality in the last decade, as well as a greater concentration of wealth, as probably most of the European countries. In fact, it's currently one of the countries in the European Union where income inequality measured with the Gini index is highest, according to data published by Eurostat 2021. That situation will probably give response why Spain is maintaining and defending the importance of a wealth tax. The Spanish wealth tax we have a complex system. I will try to very, very briefly explain the picture. We have a state tax, this old one, the 77 wealth tax. It's a direct and personal nature. Tax the net wealth of individuals as of December 31st of each year. Although it's a state, and when I say state, I mean federal. Spain is not a federal state, but a country, but I could say like different levels of government. So that wealth tax is in the central government, so it's like what you call a state tax. It is assigned to the regions, to the comunidades autónomas, to the regional level. What does it mean? Each region has the power to decide the tax rate, tax exemptions, bonification, different elements, deductions also, and also they can decide not to apply it. So, and also, of course, all the revenues are on the hands of the region. So it's a state tax, but in the hands of the regions, the regional level. As I said, it's levied on the net worldwide wealth tax of individuals. Is I mean the net, so value of goods and rights less charges and debts. There is a long list of exemptions, and that's probably one of the main reasons the revenues are not so big. I mean, households, owner management, small businesses, family business, pension rights, main property. Well, and also. It's a reduction, a big reduction from the taxable base of 700,000 euros. The rates coming from the 0.2% for taxable bases up to 167 thousands of euros to 3.5% of taxable base from 10 million, more than 10 million euros. Another element of the tax this tax is the joint limit, as you also mentioned. Is probably another reason, another element that we share with Norway. I think, yeah, you talk about that. The joint limit of personal income tax and the wealth tax. So the wealth tax plus the personal income tax liabilities cannot exceed the 60% taxable base of personal income tax. In the case of exceeding, it will be the wealth tax reduced until within the limit of 80% of that wealth tax. Well, I have some data just to say that in Spain in 2021, it was only 231,000 of persons. The tax revenues in 2022 is 1.7 million. It's 0.5 on the percentage of the total revenues. So it's not a big revenue as you can imagine. But one of the reason, well, due to this tax are completely assigned to the regions, so the revenues are assigned to the regions, and they have the total power to decide the main elements. At the end of the day, the revenues, the total amount of revenue depends on the power or the exercise that those regions are doing on those tax. That situation led us a very particular situation that an unequal application of the tax in different regions of Spain. So if a region decides not to apply the tax, you can see that it's I mean, we see different situations with other regions that they have this tax. Well, the full use of the tax autonomy in a specific area by some communities begins a process that results in a reduction of all community resources, creating, as we can say, probably the situation that you can see, probably you can translate it to a global situation, like different countries with different wealth taxes or different taxation systems, so you can almost provoke a kind of localization in country tax, right? Country tax competition. So the race to the bottom, as we mentioned, within the same country. So the situation is quite special. So that's why 2 years ago, mainly because of the let's see, tax collection. It was the crisis, it was the energy crisis, it was after the pandemic. So, I mean, the Treasury needs some resources. So we decide, for one of the reasons was the tax collection, to approve another wealth tax, complementary to this estate tax. So we approve a new wealth tax. The elements, the system is pretty much the same. Let's say it's practically a copy of the main wealth tax, but of course with a big difference. In this case, it's a completely estate tax. It's not a region tax. So it works like a little bit like a minimum tax. So if the region doesn't apply or doesn't exercise the power to excise that tax, the state, the new wealth tax is called solidarity tax, will apply. So it's quite like a minimum. Let's say it's a minimum tax. So it's the purpose is twofold. One is the tax collection, as I said, and the other one is as a purpose of harmonizing, if I call like that, with the aim of reducing the differences between different regions. So, as I said, the system is pretty much the same. The only difference is, in this case, this solidarity tax is only for a little bit more. I mean, super rich in Spain is in this case is 3 million. It's not much compared with these billionaires that we're talking about. But the difference is in the first case, the number was, you can say, the primary wealth tax is for everybody, just with a 700 tax deduction. But in this case, it's just for 3 million of taxable income. So, and in this sense, in this case, this solidarity contribution was born as a temporary tax, just because the main reason for that was increase the resources for the public resources. But it's true that after 2 years, we are evaluating the way it's functioning. I think it's going to stay for a little more, at least until the reform of the regional financial system could be finally approved. So that's the main picture of the Spanish system, and that's why, I mean, we really believe that the wealth tax is one of the key elements of the progressivity, to find the progressivity of the whole system. But it's true that I see a lot of difficulties in applying, in being efficient as it should be, this kind of tax. That's my main intervention on the Spanish system. Is quite complicated, but it's true that it's quite, efficient in that sense.
You mentioned several times that this has become technically feasible because of the victories of the past decade, of what we were able to collectively achieve on information exchange, on Pillar 2. And the EU Tax Observatory released a report a couple of months ago that you mentioned in your presentation, analyzing the impact of both reforms. And we were wondering if perhaps you could also give us a bit of details on why is this useful to this conversation today.
Absolutely, and it also connects to the efforts in Spain and in other countries to create new forms of wealth taxation. I think what's really striking with the way that wealth taxes used to work in Spain, in France, in Germany, in many countries, is the extent to which policymakers accepted tax evasion on a large scale. We had a presentation this morning. Annette showed our graph, studying Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. In 2006, when there was still a wealth tax in Sweden, there was a wealth tax in Norway, Denmark had abolished its wealth tax. But still, what was really striking is just the enormous amount of wealth that was held by very rich people in offshore financial centers with a great deal of financial opacity, leading to this gradient in tax evasion. We're talking about Scandinavian countries where rates of tax evasion tend to be pretty low across the board. These are high tax compliance countries. These are countries where most economic activity takes place in corporations. The self-employment income is not very large. Almost all income is subject to third-party reporting by employers, by banks, by pension companies. But for the super rich, tax evasion of 20-25% of their tax liability. And it's not only in Scandinavian countries. I think given that there was even more offshore wealth owned by residents of Spain, in tax havens, or France, or many, many countries. In fact, those Scandinavian countries are really at the bottom of the ranking, of the international ranking, in terms of how much wealth was held in tax havens. What's really striking is how, why did we accept this for so long? And also, and it took, what's also a bit sad is that change didn't even come from the European Union. Change came from the United States. When Barack Obama was president, just after the financial crisis of 2008-2009, he passed the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act in the US, essentially threatening Swiss banks with sanctions if they refuse to share data with the US tax authority. And that's really what started this whole process of automatic exchange of bank information. In 2013, the G20 endorsed the automatic exchange of bank information as a new global standard, mandated the OECD to sort out the technical details and ensure that this would be implemented broadly. But what I think is really striking is that it took so long, and I really hope that this time it's not going to take so long to make progress on the issue of the day, which is this quasi non-taxation of the super rich. So that's, the pessimistic take is that, okay, it can take decades, and maybe it will take again decades before we make any progress. The positive, if I try to see the glass half full, is also how change can happen, in fact, pretty fast. I think before the US, before the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, nobody really believed that there would be an automatic exchange of bank information. And now we can build on that to make sure that the Spanish wealth tax works better, to make sure that some future forms of progressive taxation will work better than in the past. One thing I want to emphasize is that even though I want to comment what Spain has been doing with wealth taxation, I think that there is a need for drawing all the lessons from our past collective failures. And I think there is at least one lesson that has not necessarily been really taken very seriously, which is that you cannot have a wealth tax that's going to work well if you say that the wealth tax liability is going to be capped at some fraction of taxable income. That's a sure recipe for ensuring that the truly wealthy are not going to pay the wealth tax. Because what we learn, the most important lessons from the recent body of work on the taxation of the super rich is that above a certain wealth level, and we're talking really high, tens of millions, hundreds of millions in net wealth, there is a systematic use of holding companies in the European Union, in Spain, in France, in the Netherlands, of shell companies to avoid the income tax and that allows these super rich individuals to report almost zero taxable income. That's the reality today in the European Union. And so if they report zero taxable income and we tell them, oh, look, any wealth tax you have to pay is going to be capped at 60% of your taxable income, that is strictly equivalent to saying there's going to be a wealth tax, but not for the super rich. That is what, in effect, it says. And we should not do that. I want to be very clear that this is what has undermined the whole idea of wealth taxation in the public debate in many countries. Many people have come to the conclusion that this was not serious, that the super rich were exempt, and that in effect the wealth tax was a kind of extra property tax for the rich but not super rich people. And this has really hurt the idea of more progressive taxation. Now, the reason why governments, it's not that the intentions are bad, this all comes from good intentions, which is to say that in many cases, when you think of people who have 1 million euros in wealth, or 800,000 euros in wealth, if you have a wealth tax on top of the income tax, on top of everything else, this can raise real liquidity concerns. So you end up in situations where people who own real estate and don't rent that real estate have to pay not only the property tax, but a kind of extra property tax, which is the wealth tax, and they just don't have the liquidity to pay for it. And in fact, for them, the wealth tax is just a property tax, and the property tax is a hated tax for good reasons, which it often raises serious liquidity concerns for retirees. So this is a reality, but the way to address that concern is not to cap the wealth tax to some fraction of income, but is to start higher in the wealth distribution at levels of wealth where there is no genuine liquidity concern. So instead of taxing people who have 700, and I'm all for taxing more people with 700,000 euros in wealth or 1 million, that's not the problem, it's just how to do it. the wealth tax is not necessarily the best instrument. Instead of starting at that level, you start at people who have 5 million, 10 million, 50 million. We can discuss depending on the countries. Above that level of wealth, there are no genuine liquidity concerns. When people say that they don't have income, it's because they organize their own illiquidity to avoid the income tax. And so you can have a reform that says, okay, look, we're going to start higher in the wealth distribution, but in exchange, we are going to get rid of these ceiling rules that otherwise really kill the progressivity of the wealth tax. And this is, this is all related to what, and this is really at the core of also the international discussion that we're having with Brazil at the G20 and so on, because what's the fundamental reason for trying to have a coordinated minimum tax on billionaires? Yes, they pay less tax than other social groups, but it's also because there is a fundamental need to demonstrate that we are going to do something different than what was done in the past. And in the past, they were exempt, and here the effort is focused on them to say, look, it's different. They will pay, and once governments have been able to demonstrate that they are serious about making those billionaires pay more in tax, it opens a realm of possibilities. It makes it possible to ask other groups of the population, and there is a need for that, for massive needs for climate, for education, for health. There is a need for much more taxpayers than billionaires to pay more in tax. But to get there, I think it's going to be very hard if we let the truly super wealthy get away with paying almost nothing.
We discussed, Gabriel alluded to the fact that a lot of reforms, international reforms, that we've witnessed over the past 10 years were deemed impossible. And you were in the room when we tried to actually secure them. Exchange of information, you were at the Global Forum at the time when it was, rolled out. Pillar 2, you were working already with the Spanish administration. So how is it when you're in the room to secure this kind of international agreements? How do you go from the theory to the practice and actually, find the compromise with 140 countries, 140 plus? Because we need to learn how to do that if we want that conversation on my left to end up to that conversation on my right.
I think it's easier to talk about the wealth tax than trying to get consensus on some kind of compromise or, as you say, common approach, common standard, minimum standard. I don't know what the term you used before talking about this. Well, I think it was a need, as you say, at the beginning or after the crisis, the 2010, 2011. I think you need the big key, stakeholder in the process. In that case, was the United States. So they had that need of resources on this. That's why they put the FATCA law on the agenda, and everybody follows the path, follows the yellow brick to them. So I think first we need a big player on the arena. We need someone taking the lead of the process first. Second, I think it was at that time it was easy because we were out of the crisis, so we were very, very concerned on how multinationals were putting their taxable tax bases on different jurisdictions, and we all knew that it was this low tax jurisdiction or no tax jurisdictions and the back secrecy. So there was a lot of negative, let's say, factors of the international taxation that I think take us to that room with a lot of need to engage on the process. So I think first big player leading the process. Maybe Brazil is the right one, because now the United States is out of the picture. So I think we need another one taking the lead. And then, during the BEPS project, we never talk about taxation. I think everybody was agreed that taxation was out of the picture. we talk about transparency, we talk about harmful tax practices, tax avoidance. So we talk about a lot of things, but we never talk about taxation. I think the taxation, as I said, it was out of the room. Why we start talking about taxation? I mean, I see some of the main European countries putting something on the table, because it was this we later call Pillar 1 on the way that we should tax the multinational, the digital economy, the digitalization of economy. So all this process from the old pillar, the old Action 1 on the best projects to this digitalization of the economy, we changed the narrative, we changed the language, but it's true that some countries propose that taxation of multinationals, like trying to balance the digitalization of the taxation of the digitalized companies, and also to close in some way this loophole of the system. So we start talking about taxation at the end of the process. Probably was because all the BEPS project was already implemented, or we were in the implementation process, but it was true that it was part of the conversation. The discussion on those rules were very much difficult, because at the beginning we were very, I mean, let's say, we didn't believe in the process, because taxation is pretty much on the core of the taxation system of our countries. I mean, even in the European Union, we need the unanimity, to agree on anything on direct taxation, for example. And even that, we don't have any concrete solution or any concrete agreement or outcome on that area. So even talking about the shell entities, I mean, it's quite a failure also in that sense. So even the European Union, we are pretty much the same systems, pretty much. So it's difficult. But it's true that in the corporate taxation system, as we discussed before, I think that most of the countries, we have the same concerns. We have the same systems, we have the same concerns. We see how companies are, I mean, moving to the intangibles or different activities to other jurisdictions that they don't pay taxes. So I think this is the sentiment and the feeling that we need in some way take that power of the taxation. So it was difficult, because we have a discussion on the 50%. It was 80%. The UTPR was very, very discussed and very difficult to agree, because I have to admit it's a very difficult rule to explain. so it's very funny the way you explain. So I think it's again, we need the political momentum, the political support, big players, and also the domestic governments need to understand this, because the way you explain, Gabriel, is I mean, it's challenging, and it's from a policy perspective. I mean, I would love to have this this easy, narrative. I would take to my parliament saying, okay, let's put like 10 million or 50 million, and everybody will say 10 million, 50 million. No, my goodness. I mean, no, let's take it down. So it's difficult to put it on the real world when you try to convince your politics, your governors, and your government that we need to do more. And I think everybody wants, and that's why I'm happy that our ministers are pretty much following the line. I think it's needed in this moment. Not only for the resources. I think you put a lot of millions there as probably revenues, but I think it's not only that. I think it's is a little more like a fairness, no? The way, I mean, tax, we are employees here, I mean, professors, civil servants. I mean, our income it's impossible to escape from taxes. So it's quite the narrative to explain why Bethos or, I mean, other people are paying so less taxes instead of all of people here probably are paying more. So is this other kind of narrative that we should include in our work. So, but I mean.
Thank you. If I have to summarize the magic recipe that you just gave, shared concern among many countries, political leadership, sort out the technical, demonstrate that the technical is done, and a bit of faith, because as you said, for BEPS at some point, even the negotiators really didn't believe you could lend. So sometimes a bit of faith does help, and
more
perhaps
than a little bit, I would say.
Okay, so you know what to do. Faith.
But wait, there's an ingredient that whatever way you want to frame that, and whether you ask Americans or French people, Spanish people, whether, number one, they think that the rich pay enough in taxes, and the vast majority says no, and whether they support some form of taxation on extreme wealth, well, hundreds, I'm not kidding, hundreds of polls in 2019, 2020, when these proposals were at the center of the Democratic primaries in the US, where Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren were defending wealth taxes. And it's 80% of Democrats, 70% overall, more than 50% of Republican and independent voters who say that they support such measures. And many, many opinion polls all over the world show that. So for me, that's what makes me fundamentally optimistic that we'll get there one day, even though it can take time for governments to listen to the huge demand that's being expressed on this issue. I'm pretty sure that there's even more demand than for the taxation of multinational companies. I think, look, we're happy that there's a 15% minimum tax on multinational firms, but it's still a very low rate, and so on. If there was a serious attempt at ending this non-taxation of billionaires, this, to your point that this is a difficult sell politically, I think on the contrary it would be something that would be a big how to put it, that people all over the world would overwhelmingly celebrate and support.
Just to summarize where we are in that process, because this is the very beginning of the conversation, you mentioned several times that the Brazilian G20 presidency invited you to make the case for such a reform. Back in February, you were invited to Sao Paulo. You were commissioned a report to which you gave some preliminary findings here that is due at the end of June. And of course, there are a number of countries that are already supporting opening that agenda of discussion. Spain is one, Brazil is another one, France is another one, South Africa, Belgium, Colombia, and we're expecting more countries to join soon. And of course, the report, we hope, will help build that momentum and perhaps have that first stage of the magic recipe you just shared. Can we have a round of applause for both our speakers? Thank you very much. And let us open the floor for questions if you have any.
Well, I won't criticize your idea, Gabriel. I just wanted to work, and I wanted to work even if, like the European Union, the idea on paper is quite beautiful, but publicly speaking, it can be quite hard. So my idea would be that the first, in my opinion, and the main issue here is that you're going to tax people. And comparatively to taxing multinationals, for example, which are abstract to some extent, here you're going to tax people. And so particular people who own media, people who can also fund political parties, etc., etc. You know that very well. So my advice would be to take some examples of billionaires who actually do pay taxes. Like Bill Gates, for example, I think he's quite pro those kind of things. And take them with you on the 25th of June and show examples, because this is how it works in the European Union. I mean, another country who goes forward gives example to a country who lags behind, and then everybody kind of follows each other towards progress. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. So a couple of questions for you. One for you, Gabriel, sorry. How do you do if billionaires live? Because there's a lot of popular support, but whenever you actually talk about taxing them, there's the risk of them leaving.
Yes, so on the first question, the popularity of such measures. So I think, look, people disagree about the ideal degree of tax progressivity. And it's great that we disagree about that. You know, it's a fundamental issue of public discussion, and the only way to get at some rational outcome is for people to argue, to disagree, to vote. And, you know, look, it's easy to get it wrong, to have too much progressivity, too little. So fine, absolutely. People disagree, and that's very good. That being said, I think very few people, as far as I can see in opinion polls, very few people condone a situation where the individuals with the most power, the highest ability to pay taxes, have a lower effective tax rate than everybody else. I think really I've never seen anyone saying, look, I think it's good, it's normal for teachers and firefighters to pay more tax than billionaires. This is the way the world should work. I think really nobody agrees with that. Then there's a debate about whether the billionaires should have the same tax rate as everybody else, or, you know, much higher effective tax rates. So that's one. Then the second reason, and then you're perfectly right to say, in practice, the main fear, the debate always boils down to, let's not shoot ourselves in the foot. You know, let's not have a tax that's just going to lead billionaires to move abroad. That's self-defeating. And we all agree. And that's the starting point for that whole discussion, that whole effort, is how do we address that very specific issue? And there is, and that ties back to the second question, there is one ideal solution is all countries agree. We're not going to have a unanimous agreement. And then there is what I described at the very end, and which is the most important thing, and I want to make sure everybody understands. There is the idea that you don't need all countries, you need a critical mass of countries, and perhaps, look, we're not far from that. These efforts have started 3 months ago, and we already have Brazil, we already have France, we already have South Africa, we already have Belgium, we already have the African Union, Colombia, and more countries are going to announce, in just 3 months, their support for this measure. So we're not perhaps very far from that critical mass of first movers, but it needs to grow. Okay, so you need a critical mass of countries, and then those countries need to say something important. They need to say that they will collect taxes on behalf of other countries. If other countries choose not to tax their billionaires, that's their choice. But the countries that choose to join this international agreement, to implement that standard, will tax these non-resident, these foreign billionaires, to the extent that these billionaires, they spend a bit of time in France. They own some assets in Brazil. Their firms, their companies derive profits from having access to the markets of these countries that are part of the agreement. If you do that, then that's how you solve this fundamental issue of, are we going to shoot ourselves in the foot? Because then there's no, incentives for billionaires to move. If they move to tax havens, it doesn't change anything. It wouldn't change anything for them. That you have to have some countries playing this role of tax collector of last resort. And look, I'm not saying it's very, very easy. You know, if there's just one country alone, you know, if France wanted to do that, it wouldn't work. Yes, billionaires would say, look, I can live without France. Goodbye Roland Garros, but Wimbledon, you know, yeah, that's fine enough. So, fine. But if you have sufficiently many countries that they care about, that account for a significant fraction of the market shares of their businesses, it will work. Because if you are super rich, you cannot just live on your tropical island or, you know, disconnected from the rest of the world. That's just not how it works. Okay, so that fundamentally is what makes this proposal feasible. And then on the last question on can we enroll rich people in that quixotic quest, look, there is this movement of the so-called patriotic millionaires that you might know about, of rich people saying, tax me now. And they are increasingly vocal about the fact that, you know, like Warren Buffett likes to say, you know, there is a class war, and we, the billionaires, we are on the winning side. You know, we are winning the class war. We're not paying any tax. And look, many people, very rich, understand that it's in fact in their best interest to stop that situation, because what's the alternative? You know, if we can't find coordinated solutions to these problems, you know, most likely there is not much sustainability for globalization. You know, it's not going to continue. If globalization means ever lower taxes for its main beneficiaries, then it can only end in some major backlash. And the very wealthy, they understand that. We all understand that, but they also understand that they are the main beneficiaries from global economic integration, and they have the most to lose from a backlash. And so I think, and they have a lot to win from a more sustainable form of globalization. And so, yeah, we will enroll them, and I think.
Threat is not a good argument.
But what?
Threatening them is not a good argument.
Threatening, it's not a threat, it's just the reality of the sustainability of the current arithmetic of globalization. You know, it's absolutely not a threat. And yeah, as I said, in any case, you know, you have the patriotic millionaires, and the one last thing I wanted to say is just it's not, you know, fundamentally, and gets back to the first part of the response, that even though the wealthy have a very important role to play, I want to say two things. One is that most of them, I think, will fight. You know, most billionaires, they will fight, you know, this proposal, and they will fight hard. And they have a particular hatred for any form of taxation that's similar to a wealth tax. Why? Because they understand that this is the one tax, if it was done well, that would actually work to tax them. And it's really funny to see, and I've been in some of these debates, you know, with very wealthy people in France, you know, billionaires in France, and they are extremely, extremely critical of the French wealth tax that was abolished in 2018. And they said, you know, when it existed, it was really terrible, you know, horrible for my business. And every time I ask them, well, look, but did you pay it? Because according to the data, you know, really the French billionaires, they paid zero. And I'm sure that you didn't pay it because, you know, you have these ceiling mechanisms, private, you know, large stakes in companies, even listed companies were exempt. And yes, they didn't pay it. And yet they fight to say it was terrible, even though they paid no cent, because they understand that actually, if we did it well, yes, it could make a real difference. The rates could increase, 2% is not a lot, but you know, the income tax started with very low rate, then the rates increased a lot. So they will fight. And second, you know, fundamentally, it's not for the wealthy. It's not to decide what should be the tax rates of the wealthy. It's not for researchers to decide what should be the tax rates of the wealthy. It's for citizens to decide through democratic deliberation and the vote.
Thank you, Gabriel. I just want to make sure we have time to answer some of the questions that were asked, and two questions in particular. One, how do you make a good use of tax revenues? That's one of the questions that was raised over here. And second question over there, do you think unilateral measures played the role in actually securing a global deal? Did that help, or was counter-useful? Thank you very much.
I will start by the end. Well, I think the DSTs play a role. They had a role on, but not in the pillar 2, but more in pillar 1. And I don't know how successful it's going to be that process. So for the moment, yes. And a short answer, the answer will be yes. It has been a very important role, because the United States was very, very keen to take out of the DSTs around the world. So it was a precondition to start the negotiation, pretty much on, okay, we can start talking about this if you commit to agree to delete or to suspend your DST. So it was a big role. I don't know what kind of play can we have in this process, but I mean, and also, I mean, I heard a lot of discussion on the tax myth. This is a very important discussion on, I mean, how much tax should we pay? This is a big question, as Mayra, you mentioned. I think it's quite difficult, because the personal income tax in the individual income tax is the systems around the world are very, very difficult. And I mean I see from the European Union, anytime we discuss something on direct tax, especially if we touch the personal income tax, it's impossible to start the discussion. I don't know if it will be different in the future, but until now, I have to say that it's anytime we put even to discuss the personal income taxes or the individuals regimes on the code of conduct to study or to evaluate, even in that it was not just on taxation, but to include, to study, to evaluate those regimes. I mean, I'm thinking this kind of these regimes that don't tax the income on the country, you know, as this we call in Spain this domiciles regime that you just tax. I mean, even we try to put it on the table for discussion. I mean, it's a lot of concerns, a lot of questions for countries. So it's not easy to talk about individual taxes, income taxes. So it's if we can imagine trying to harmonize in some way, just like a minimum level, I think it could be very difficult. As I said before, corporate income tax is one thing, because the systems or the regimes are pretty similar, but when you move to the personal income tax, it's quite difficult. But it's true that, I mean, I agree with you that the progressive reason is there. I mean, we are also talking about maybe the VAT progressive. I mean, so I think everybody understands and everybody agrees that the progressivity is needed in some way in the system. So, well, I go to another. Sorry. And other question was about this revenues or.
The good use of revenues. Like, how can you demonstrate that?
Well, this is another big, let's say, Pandora box if we talk about this, and this is a very, very difficult question. How good is the use we do to the revenues? I mean, we tried. I mean, it depends of the government. It's quite it's a political elections. I mean, you can have a public health, a public schools, or you can have just like a more minimum level of services. I mean, in Spain, the tax administration is trying to produce some studies on the cost of the services. I mean, how your taxes are used for different services, the public, the health, the education. So, I mean, this is something is probably a big question for future. And also, if I may, I would like to add something that you were talking, Gabriel, about the UTPR on this process. I think I don't want to go to the technical, because I think we will have time in the next years to discuss the technical things. But I would say it's probably the most difficult thing, because at least in Spain, we have a taxation on non-resident. When you get income from Spain, or you have immovable property, so we have taxes on non-resident. So that will be, but at least you have to have something like a footprint in some way. Some income to tax, or just a flat, an apartment, or whatever. But just to stay, just because you spend 5 days in Spain, I don't know what is the taxation that I can get from you if you have nothing here. So in Spain, so that will be is not for now, of course, but something that I wanted to share with you, that I think is probably one of the elements that it could be more difficult. But that's all. Sorry.
Thank you very much. We're going to the end of that discussion. There's still a bit of work to convince the policymakers, as you can see here in that discussion. But that discussion has started, increasing number of countries joining the ranks and supporting that agenda. And the report is out in a few weeks, so that might also help the conversation. Thank you very much for sticking with us. It's 6 o'clock. It's actually past 6. And you're so many still around here to listen to taxation. That's actually in itself very positive. Thank you very much. Have a good night.